We'll start our unit on instructional leadership by looking briefly at curriculum and what it means across educational settings and specifically in your schools. Our brief presentation here will look at a few meanings of curriculum, also the importance of clarity in what we mean when we talk about curriculum, especially for instructional leaders and school principals. And then we'll give a little bit of an overview of the curriculum reflection assignment and what's expected for this week. It's worth starting by stating uh, how important curriculum is for the academic success of students and the instructional environment of a school. And Mike Schmoker, in his 2011 book Focus, argues that it's the single most important thing in highly effective schools is a coherent, content-rich curriculum. Now, whether or not we agree that it's the single most important thing in a highly effective school, I think we could probably all agree that without a clearly stated curriculum, uh, our schools would lack the foundation instructionally and for assessment and for academics that they need in order for students to be successful. But although we can agree on that, it's sometimes very difficult to define what is curriculum. In an offhand and perhaps colloquial way, we often would say that curriculum is what we teach. And that is actually not a bad definition to use if you're sort of speaking at a 30,000 foot view, if you will. But as educational leaders and principals and teachers, we have an obligation to be more specific than that because we deal with curriculum day in and day out in different ways and in different nuances. And so some of the ways that curriculum is described by Catholic schools are represented here. And this is just not even a random snapshot of the ways that curriculum can be used. We start with that Standard 7 from the National Benchmarks and Standards for Catholic Schools, which states, rightly so, that an excellent Catholic school has a clearly articulated, rigorous curriculum aligned with relevant standards, 21st century skills, and gospel values implemented through effective instruction. And that is a great benchmark, something to shoot for, but we need to be more specific in what we're talking about in terms of curriculum in a Catholic school in order to be able to meet that. And so different Catholic schools, I've picked a few here, talk about curriculum in different ways. So one there at the top talks about the academic curriculum based on Common Core standards that's challenging and motivating. Another on the bottom on the left talks about individual intellectual growth, so some kind of differentiation being part of the curriculum, and then linking that to a variety of instructional techniques. So curriculum not being the instruction, but something about what is taught. The one to the right of that talks about challenging academic standards of the Catholic curriculum, what that might be, and then it gives a few examples. And then the one there at the bottom talks about the academic curriculum being challenging, and that's in accordance with diocesan standards and next generation state standards. And so we talk about curriculum being aligned with different types of things. We talk about it encompassing different types of things, but what do we really mean when we're talking about the curriculum specifically? How can we interpret those statements? And then as school leaders, how can we communicate what we mean when we talk about curriculum, which can have so many meanings? The reading for this week comes out of Marshall's book, which you all have, and it's the chapter on curriculum planning. And it's well worth reading the entire chapter as sort of thinking about the big picture of curriculum, the importance of curriculum. And that entire chapter is assigned for this unit because we are sort of trying to establish the foundation of curriculum here in the context of the audits that you'll do for the end of the unit. However, there is a list and a description in that chapter that does a very, very good job of articulating the different meanings of curriculum as we use them in education. Everything, and I won't expound on them here because it's in the reading, but everything from standards and K-12 articulation to the very materials that are used in a classroom. And it's extremely important to be clear about these as an educational leader. One type of curriculum that Marshall does not address, or one description of curriculum, is the hidden curriculum. And we won't go into a whole lot of depth here, but it's certainly worth considering, especially in the context of Catholic schools, in a lot of dimensions. Now, when Coleman articulated the hidden curriculum, um, he mostly meant it as sort of the power structures, or the structures of influence and privilege in schools. Things like what kinds of kids get called on in school, who gets special privileges in school, things that kids learn, like I'm able to read, or I am a good student. These kinds of almost value laden things that are present in every school. And I'm offering this here as sort of food for thought in terms of what it might mean to talk about a Catholic school curriculum, especially here in the 21st century. There was a time when a Catholic school curriculum, um, to what meaning specifically what was learned and taught in each grade, and the relative emphasis on different subjects, was quite different from other kinds of schools. More and more, there's a blurring of the lines in between the content, as that's learned in, say, public schools and Catholic schools, or charter schools and Catholic schools and public schools. Um, in large part because we have much more research, all of us, at our disposal about what is can be effective for students, and what good curriculum can and should be, and what expectations for kids of different ages could be. But where we might think about how our curricula are distinguished, or one way I should say, is in this hidden curriculum. Um, Statements that we make implicitly by being a Catholic school, like all students have dignity and all students can achieve, and to borrow a term from the ACE academies, that the goal of school is to get to college and to get to heaven. So you might think about, what is that sort of the stuff that's sort of in the air and in the water that the students learn in Catholic schools because they're Catholic schools, is another way of thinking about curriculum. It is not specifically tied necessarily to the instructional leadership and academic excellence per se, but it's certainly worth looking at, or at least thinking about a little bit here in the context of curriculum in Catholic schools. And so when we think about curriculum in our Catholic schools, curriculum is all of these things at once. It's sometimes something we sense, we know it when we see it, yet it is any one of these things specifically at any given time. And as instructional leaders in schools, and as principals, as curriculum directors, however that role may play itself out, it's the responsibility of the instructional leadership to provide clarity of terms when talking about curriculum. Um, for if, even only at the baseline level, that all teachers, especially, and parents and others engaged, other stakeholders, are having the same conversation, so that they can really focus in on um, what's really being said about curriculum and how it affects students. Um, and because curriculum has so many meanings, it's important to be consistent in articulating an understanding of what is meant and expected for each of those meanings of curriculum. And then finally, the responsibility falls to the principal and the instructional leadership of the school, to provide a consistent and what we might call a guaranteed implementation of that curriculum. If we want students to have educational opportunity, if we are interested in equity of opportunity for all students, and we are, then we have to be able to be very clear about what it is we are teaching and what it is we expect the students to learn in all of those aspects of curriculum. And so you will start your process of looking more closely at the curriculum in your school, in part in preparation for the audit that you will do for the end of the instructional leadership unit. And so the big question here really is what is meant by curriculum in your school, and how does that matter for student learning? And so we're going to ask that for this assignment you interview 3 or 4 teachers very briefly, and this doesn't have to be empirical. You don't need to take notes on it, but just talk to teachers. Maybe they're your grade partners, maybe they're people you work with in faculty meetings, whoever it may be, and just ask them, what is the curriculum that you teach, or how would you define curriculum? And you'll find some cases people are very specific, but in some cases they do talk around curriculum because it's one of those things that we don't often take the opportunity to define. So one way that you might help people to define it is to give you a concrete example. Could you put your hands on it? Could you give an example of what your curriculum is? And so after you've talked with a few teachers, we'll just ask you to share your conversation or your reflections on it with the rest of the group. And there's a discussion forum open in edX that will that basically asks you to articulate how is curriculum used at your school, or what did you find out, and does that relate to how the curriculum is defined by Marshall? Is there any one that really seems to kind of surface, or are people using all different kinds of definitions? And then as you continue to reflect on that, if anything comes to mind on how that might affect student learning and achievement, include that too. Now, we're only asking here for a paragraph's reflection or so, so obviously we're only going to hit the surface here. But thinking about these things will prepare you when you do an audit of the curriculum, number one, to be very clear about what you're looking at, and then number two, to really focus what you find on student learning and student achievement, which is really, at the end of the day, the goal and the emphasis and the focus of the instructional leadership of a school. If you have any questions about the assignment or anything about curriculum, feel free to contact any one of the instructors and we'll be happy to help.